This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the Deployment Committee to order. It is now 2:02 on Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. Let me see if we have any public comments. Anybody from the public on the line that wants to say a few things? All right, hearing none, let's move forward to agenda item 3, the approval of the meeting minutes. So we've got the meeting minutes from our last meeting on November 17th, 2021. Does anyone want to move the motion to approve resolution number 1 on those meeting minutes?
This is Lonnie, so moved.
Great, thank you, Lonnie. Is there a second?
This is Dominic, second.
Great, thank you, Dominic. All right, questions, comments? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Nays? Abstentions? Okay, great. Meeting minutes approved. Okay, so I'm gonna transfer this over to both Bert Hunter and Joe Buonata, who are gonna walk us through 2 items that are relevant to the Smarty loan. Bert, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Can you hear me okay? Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Bert, you're fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. And Joe and I will walk you through this agenda item. Just to refresh your memories, back in November, we provided the Deployment Committee with an overview of the Smarty loan and suggested at that time that we would be coming back to the committee to seek endorsement of a reallocation of ERA funds that are supporting the Smarty program. And the ERA funds are American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds that were grants from the federal government to the Green Bank through DEEP under a memorandum of understanding that's been amended a couple of times to extend its life. And the purpose of that is to assist in the deployment of clean energy. And we've been using those funds for a combination of loan loss reserves to support our local lenders in the Smarty program, as well as to provide some interest rate buy down funds to help with promotional campaigns that the Green Bank, more recently with the assistance of Inclusive Prosperity Capital, Joe Buonata being representative of IPC, during over a period of years. So how we're going to organize this is Joe is going to give a brief refresher and on the Smarty, and then I will walk through the reallocations. So Joe, you want to take it away?
Sure, thanks, Bert. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Buonata with Inclusive Prosperity Capital. Good to be with you all. So as Bert mentioned, I have a few slides just to give the committee an overview of the Smarty loan program. So Smarty is a residential financing program that was first approved by the Deployment Committee in 2012 and then launched officially in May of 2013 and went statewide, achieved statewide lender coverage later that year in 2013. So it's administered by the Green Bank, done so in partnership with currently 9 local lenders. So we have 1 community development financial institution, Capital for Change, as well as a handful of credit unions and local community banks. And we also have a network of about 350 contractors across different industries, and that number really grows by the week. The loan can be used to finance 40 different clean energy improvements. So right now, kind of the high level buckets are solar, battery storage, health and safety, meaning asbestos and asbestos-related mold remediation, home performance, so windows and insulation, HVAC, so different heating and cooling like air source and ground source heat pumps, and as well as electric vehicle charging stations. So the loan amounts range from as little as $500 to as high as $40,000. And we'll discuss in a bit. Part of the second request is about some adjustments to the both the eligible improvements and the loan amounts. The rates and terms that are available to the borrowers range from 5 to 12 years, 4.49% up to 6.99%. And it's a loan product focused on owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit residential properties. Anything 5 units or larger is considered multifamily. So we focus on the 1 to 4 unit owner-occupied space. It is available statewide. So there are other programs in the market in Connecticut under the Energized Connecticut umbrella, like the Connecticut Heat Loan that is tied to Eversource or UI territory. Smarty is available statewide. So we often see projects come through from municipal utility territories like Norwich or Wallingford or others. There is no money down with this program, so a borrower can finance up to 100% of their project cost. They lock in a fixed monthly payment for their term, but if they wanted to pay off their loan in advance of their term, they could do so without any penalty assessed. And something that the contractors really like is that there's no contractor fees for them to participate, no minimum amounts of projects that they need to complete in order to stay active. We simply just verify that they maintain good standing with the Better Business Bureau rating and that they maintain appropriate levels of insurance and that they meet all of the Department of Consumer Protection's licensing requirements for the types of projects that they're doing. We currently have a carve out that allows up to 25% of a Smarty loan to be used for what's considered an other or related energy measure. Those are things right now like Energy Star appliances or some repairs in advance of installing solar or a service upgrade in advance of installing a battery or an air source heat pump project. Next slide, please.
Joe, this is Brian. I have two questions. One,
sure.
could you elaborate a little bit more on the process to onboard contractors? It's not necessarily relevant now, but it will be relevant later when we talk about environmental infrastructure. And then secondly, just in terms of the interest rates and the terms there, I think those are not to exceed rates in that there are a few of our partners that can go beyond 12 years. Can you kind of like speak to that a little bit, those two things?
Sure. So I'll start with the contractor question. So the answer to onboarding contractors goes back now 9 or 10 years. So once the program was the structure of the program was approved by the deployment committee, the team got to work with engaging different groups. And so a couple of examples are we worked with our partners through Energized Connecticut, namely the electric and gas utilities, as well as DEEP, to engage their networks of contractors. We also worked to identify different distributors. So examples are we attended in-person and online trainings with groups like Plimpton and Hills and Shelton and Nelson, the groups that the contractors purchase their equipment from that maintain lists of eligible contractors. We also engage different trade associations, groups like the Connecticut Heating and Cooling Contractors. They would have events throughout the year, and the Connecticut Green Bank became a member of that group. And then others, channels of onboarding contractors that kind of continue to take place currently are introductions via lenders, or even just a homeowner saying, I want to work with such and such company, but I don't see them on your list, and we'd like to onboard them. So we've really developed kind of a really robust network. 350 is the list of active contractors, but we've probably trained well above that. And kind of looking ahead into environmental infrastructure, if the second request here gets approved to add those measures into the program, we would need to kind of kick off a process, which we've started to groups like the Department of Consumer Protection, but we really need to identify, which trade associations or which, contractor groups are the right ones to talk to, because we always want to, not just bring in any contractor, because there's lots, especially in the HVAC industry, there are lots of different companies, but we want to make sure that we're onboarding the companies that are installing, the highest efficiency equipment or the best equipment in that space, and contractors with good reputations in the industry. Does that answer the question on the contractors piece, Brian?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And then on the rates, yeah. So the term sheet, which we included in the memo to the board, to the committee, includes the not to exceed kind of rate card. So 5 to 12 years, 4.49% to 6.99%. We do have a handful, I think probably 3 of our lenders who agreed to go beyond 12 years to 15 and 20-year terms, keeping that 6.99% rate. It was actually done at the request of several geothermal and solar contractors who wanted to see longer term loans. We haven't seen a much volume in that, but some contractors do like to promote it as an option through certain lender partners. And we also, because the rates are not to exceed, it allows some of the lenders to offer rates below that. So for example, when we onboarded a few community banks several years ago, they decided to offer for a 10-year loans, for example, at 5.75% rather than 5.99 to be more competitive with some of their community bank neighbors. But currently, all of the lenders are offering those not to exceed rates. On that note, these are the lenders that are actively participating in the program. Like I mentioned, there's Capital for Change, as well as a handful of community banks and credit unions, all fan. 2 of our lenders, Capital for Change and Eastern Connecticut Savings Bank, both lend, whereas the others have specific service territory, either by county or by number of municipalities. But the lenders all have, so there is a term sheet that was approved for the loan. And in 2017, we introduced our alternate term sheet, which on the screen is labeled as the credit challenge term sheet. So the standard term sheet is a little bit more conservative in the underwriting box. It's a 40 credit score minimum, as well as a 45% debt to income ratio maximum. Whereas the credit challenge term sheet is a 580 credit score minimum, 50% debt to income ratio maximum. And then that debt to income screen is waived for borrowers that have a 680 credit score or higher. So of those, 5 of our lenders, all 3 credit unions, Capital for Change and Eastern Connecticut Savings Bank, they're all on the credit challenge term sheet. The other 4 community banks, so Union, Thomaston, Ion, and Patriot, are on our standard term sheet. But 90% of our Smarty volume is from the lenders that are on the credit challenge term sheet. And it's just because there's less restrictions. It allows broader applicability to the market, broader base of borrowers. But on the next screen, you'll actually see that even though we have this credit challenge term sheet, the average credit score of the portfolio is still a 744. So these are just high-level stats through the end of January. We're just shy of 6,000 closed loans at about $90 million of private capital deployed through this program. Our average loan amount is about $15,000 because we really see the sweet spot of this program being in the HVAC world. Ductless mini split projects, especially we're seeing more of recently. So air source heat pumps, insulation, windows. We've sort of seen a trend away from solar because of so many other competitive financing programs. But we're seeing an increase in other renewables like ground source heat pumps that are becoming more more active through the program. So the portfolio performance continues to be strong. That's something that's been pretty consistent throughout the 10 years almost of the program. And even through the pandemic, we haven't seen kind of a large fluctuation in the performance. Default rates, 0.1%. The delinquency rate is just under 1%, and the charge-off rate is just over 1%. So strong portfolio performance. And with that, unless there are any other questions about the program, I can turn it over to Bert about the error restructuring.
Great. Any questions from the deployment committee members before we move to the restructuring? Thank you, Joe. Great overview.
Sure.
Okay, let's keep going. All right, Bert.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Joe. That was a great overview. So similar to what was done in 2017, we're coming before the deployment committee in order to get a recommendation from the committee to the board for a reallocation of ERA funds between various programs that these funds are supporting. These ERA funds are currently allocated toward loan loss reserves in some programs that are that no longer are needing them for the various uses that they were originally intended. And what we want to do is we want to free those funds up in one case, provide green bank loan loss reserve funds, meaning balance sheet funds, in order to free up those ERA funds so that we can use them as interest rate buy downs to fund additional campaigns to deploy additional clean energy measures. So given our loan loss reserve structure and loan performance over the years, very little of the loan loss reserves have been used in the Smarty program. That's why we came to the deployment committee back in 2017 to do that reallocation. We are hitting the 10-year mark with these ERA funds, and this requires us to constantly, every quarter, report to the federal government how these funds are being used. And so if we keep these funds in place for loan loss reserves, given our performance to date, we'll probably be reporting for the next 10 years at least. So in order to put these funds to better use, we've explained in the memorandum that was distributed to the board how we want to continue this process of reallocation. As you see on the screen, we would allocate a little over $200,000 from interest income that has been earned on the ERASEP funds, which has to be used again for ERASEP purposes. The SEP stands for State Energy Programs. And then to reallocate $17,193 from the Cozy Home Loan Loan Loss Reserve. That product was retired a long time ago, and move that over to the Smarty LLR. And then we would make some loan loss reserve payments to 3 Smarty lenders who we have finally tallied up. They finally presented their loans to us, and we finally gone through the mechanism of determining how much needs to be paid. And this would certainly come from the funds that we're reallocating. Then in the Lyme Loan program, there's $300,000 in ERASEP funds currently supporting that program. We would use $300,000 in Green Bank balance sheet funds to support that program. And then finally, we would then reallocate the $300,000 from the Lyme Loan and $311,000 from the CT solar loan, which has been, that program has ended and is no longer being used to support, lenders, capital providers that had funded us. First it was Mosaic, and there was another lender that had provided some funding to us. And so those loans have been, that funding has been repaid by the Green Bank. So those ERA funds are no longer, that other lender was the reinvestment fund. So those loans were repaid. Those funds are no longer needed, that $300,000, the $311,546. And then the $11,600 in ARICEP funds from the Cozy Home Loan IRB would go, all of that combined would go to a combination of Smarty IRBs, a little over $600,000, and just a small portion going to Smarty LLR. And that's so that we can clean up any losses that have been submitted to the Green Bank to date for payment out of the LLR. So I think that totals about 160,000, which was in 164,928, which is specified in the memo. Next slide, please. This table was meant to be more helpful in pointing out all the accounting moves that went into the original allocation and how the funds were used and committed. And you will see there, for example, under the Smart E loan, that we have used more than $7 million thus far in interest rate buy downs for that program. And we have also, that's actually expended. And there's a further 134,000 that's been committed for interest rate buy downs that will be paid out as soon as the reallocations that are approved by the deployment committee and approved by the board are carried out. We also have under the solar loan category, there was a use of $157,000 in IRBs for that program. And then you see down below the interest allocation, the interest earned on the ERA funds, and how we're planning to use that to pay out some LLR. I'm sorry, those were actually paid out to lenders prior to today. So $73,542. So you see the $300,000 in the final column. That is the amount of Green Bank funds that will be required as a result of the action we're asking you to take. And that's how all the funds tie together here between the $8,576,000 of original ERA funds plus interest, then allocating it over to the LLR and the IRB, and those two columns total the $8,576,000. Are there any questions on this? I'm sorry to throw so many numbers at the committee, but I just in the interest, it's important for us to have this properly laid out, because if the state auditors come along, they need to know that we have presented exactly what's happening with these ERA funds when they move from program to program. Okay, if there are no questions.
Bert, it's Matt.
Hey, yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe just two quick questions. One, so under ERA, as you pointed out, there were a bunch of strings for reporting. So two questions. One is, when we transfer these, will this sort of be considered the final use of the funds, and we don't have to on the funds in the programs where I also thought the ERA funds had Davis-Bacon restrictions attached to them. Is that going to be something that creates an issue if that's the case for using these funds the way you've proposed? And the third question is I'm sorry if I missed it, where does the extra 300,000 come from?
Okay, let me take it in reverse. The 300,000 comes from our balance sheet.
Okay.
So we would just move 300,000 of cash into a restricted account on the balance sheet. As far as Davis-Bacon is concerned, there's a waiver for residential properties. I'm pretty sure Brian Garcia,
That's correct. There's a categorical exemption for both Davis-Bacon and NEPA for residential projects. Yeah, that was one of the original designs of it. That's right.
Okay.
And we've been living with we've been living with any kind of there's Historic Preservation Act requirements that we still are required to undertake, but we've been doing that for the entire 10 years of the program. So we have that down.
Okay.
Sorry, the first question was,
do we get out of the reporting requirements?
The reporting requirements keep going until we've actually expended all the money. And that's one of the benefits of the using it for interest rate buy downs, is that we know that we will get rid of these funds, because we'll keep running the IRB until we have our last loan that gets bought down. So once that gets to zero, we'll file a final report, and then we'll be done with it.
I guess my last catch-all question is there something in particular you think the auditors might be looking at when they look at this transfer?
No, in fact, I think 99 times out of 100, they would just pass by this.
Yep.
But if they happen to look at this, meaning the ERA funds, they might say, "Oh, let's see your board approvals on how these funds have been allocated." It's like, okay, so we just want to make sure we have a proper allocation set forth.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Great. Any other questions, comments? We are going to, before we get to the resolution, the motion on the resolution, we're going to summarize all this into a 2-page infographic. Hopefully we'll have that for the board meeting. That's going to show that as a result of the $8.6 million of RFSEP funds, we've been able to mobilize over $160 million of private investment into residential clean energy programs. So it will be a big success story as we look ahead to compete for more federal resources through the bipartisan infrastructure law. All right, so do we have a motion to approve resolution number 2, which is a recommendation to the board?
So moved. It's Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Lonnie, I second.
Great, thank you, Lonnie. Questions, comments? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, great work. Good summary, guys. All right, let's keep going.
Okay, the next item relates to the scope expansion passed in statute last year, which allows the Green Bank to fund environmental infrastructure measures. So what we want to do, if you go to the next slide, please, under the Smarty loan program, is to amend the underwriting term sheet, which is between the Green Bank and all of the qualifying lenders, to allow for the addition of environmental infrastructure measures to the list of eligible improvements. So you see the definition that would be added to the list of eligible improvements. That's item number 3, which is circled in the box. Sorry about that, circled in the box. And then going along with that is to increase the maximum loan amount from $45,000 to $75,000. And this is actually being done to not only compensate for additional borrowings that might a homeowner might want to do related to environmental infrastructure needs, but also we have the new battery the electric storage program that was kicked off on January 1 that involves not only residential but non-residential properties in the state, but the Smarty would be able to fund that. It's currently able to do that, but now that there are actually incentives, it seems that a number of homeowners could afford themselves the benefit of doing energy storage combined with their existing solar PV loans or new PV projects going forward. So a number of the lenders, when we talked to them about the covering battery storage, they made the observation that, well, with all these additional provisions that Smarty could be used for, it'd be helpful to have the loan maximum raised. And so we settled on a figure of $75,000, which we think would be very adequate. We would also, at the same time, currently we're able to we're required to sign off on any loan above $40,000, and those loans have to come to us for a sign off. We would increase that threshold to $50,000 because there hasn't been any change in that level since the origin of the program. And we have had a lot of success with the banks underwriting these loans. You can see that by the loan loss experience. I think I mentioned $238,000 over 10 years and $90 million worth of loans. So we think the structure of our loan loss reserve as a second loss reserve and not a first loss reserve has really stood the test of time. So that's what's being brought before you today as a request for approval. Let's see, Joe, would you like to walk through this allocation of measures and the technical requirements and so forth?
Sure. Thanks, Bert. So this framework here on the screen is what the program team, so between IPC and the Connecticut Green Bank, have been using to assess the addition of any possible new measures. And so if the approval for the category of environmental infrastructure measures gets approved, then we will start assessing measures through this criteria, and then bringing those recommendations to the Connecticut Green Bank senior team for approval before making any adjustments to the eligible contractor list, or excuse me, the eligible measure list. And so what we're looking at which category, which environmental infrastructure category does the measure hit. And so those are things like parks and recreation, or water, or resiliency, climate adaptation. And so first it's you put it into one of those buckets. Then it's assess that measure to determine what technical parameters should we impose on those measures. So for example, insulation currently to be financed using a Smarty loan needs to achieve a certain final R value, which is a criteria set by the utilities for the installation rebate through Energize Connecticut. So if we were to install, approve a water measure, something like a septic system or some sort of other flood mitigation measure, what are the technical requirements that we need to impose for that? And so doing a lot of research to understand what the measures or what the appropriate parameters should be for that. And then on a related front, who are the contractors that should be allowed into the program, and what licensing and requirements, licensing and insurance requirements should we ask for those? We've already started conversations with the Department of Consumer Protection, who we've worked with closely on the clean energy side, to inquire about what sorts of requirements they recommend we impose. And so those conversations will be ongoing. And then also what the program inspection process should be. So currently, the first 3 projects of every new contractor in the Smarty program get inspected by a Connecticut Green Bank inspector, and then we do spot checks after a certain number of projects moving forward. And so we want to make sure that we have appropriately trained contractors who can now go out and assess these new measures. So it's a whole new world for the program, which we're really, really excited about. But we know that it's going to come with lots of research that's needed. And so the request for approving the just kind of the category of environmental infrastructure will then allow us to assess these measures kind of on an ongoing basis, similar to how the program was initially approved, with just the structure of clean energy measures, and then allowing the Connecticut Green Bank senior team to make the decision on the individual measures. One important note that we called out both in the memorandum and wanted to do again so in the presentation for the committee is that no ratepayer funds will be used for environmental infrastructure measures, and neither will any funds from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So in the event that there is a project that would need to be, that has a environmental infrastructure measure component as well as a clean energy component, those would need to be 2 separate loans, and we would train the contractors and the lenders on that. So we would keep those types of projects and the funding sources completely independent of one another.
This is Sarah Sanders. I just have a couple questions, and maybe it's coming in later in the presentation. So I'm trying to get my arms around what exactly are the projects that are environmental infrastructure. Now, you mentioned septic systems. That's a big area. And then flood mitigation measures, like would that be like raising a house down on the shoreline? I mean, can you give more examples? Maybe it's coming up of tangible examples of what falls into that category.
Yeah, let me try a few, and Joe fill in for me. Yeah, I think on the resilient side, one of the items, the big items would be raising the home. That is something DEEP is after, given shoreline impact. That can be really sizable. So I think we're going to have to dig in and think a little bit more about that. And we're going to meet with DEEP early in March to do that. You could think about your basement, sealing it from floods, addressing flooding issues with your basement. Water, could be a well, could be well water testing, could be pipes in your home. Waste, could be septic tanks, as you're talking about. So yeah, like the process that we go through is going to be, trying to understand what all those things are that are consistent with the definition. And I think, Joe, we're going to be methodical. So we're going to start off with resiliency, climate adaptation and resiliency, which is one of the key measures that DEEP is after and is very consistent with confronting climate change, which is our mission. So we're going to have a meeting with DEEP next month to kind of begin that assessment. I think on the large projects, it's lifting the home. On the smaller end, it might be flood guards, might be, a number of other things, sump pumps, but we just need to start digging into those measures a bit.
Just out of curiosity, would crumbling foundations fall into that category, or is that really a different?
It's a good question. I'll just say out loud, Bert, you pick me up here. We do have, what is it? Environmental markets is also included within our environmental infrastructure definition, and it's kind of a catch-all. We haven't looked into it yet in our assessment, but things like brownfields could fit there broadly outside of residential. But maybe crumbling foundations could fit there. Bert, I'm not sure how we think about it.
You may be able to make a justification of that from a water incursion perspective. So foundations do prevent water from seeping into the home. And so you could see how if that foundation is crumbling, not only do you have a structural issue, but you also have a water mitigation issue. So I think you could get there perhaps on that basis.
Well, it's already a program for that. I think Chaff is involved, but anyway, just curious.
This is Lonnie, just, responding to that as a person who is the legislator dealing with this. I would stay away from that. Let Chaffa handle it. I mean, there are so many entities involved in that, and it's really not the kind of clean stuff that we like to do in terms of understanding who all the actors and the players are. And, it just feels like it pulls you into places that you're not necessarily in charge of how it all goes down. So, and also building on what Sarah said, because this is something I've talked to Brian about. At some point, when I chaired the Energy Committee, it really, in the off season, field trips were really helpful. We were passing legislation to implement, all kinds of, exciting new programs, and no one was really, we were seeing it on charts and graphs and, the way we're seeing it today, but to actually go out and to see it and to talk to people and, you have to plan those. It can't just kind of happen in an ad hoc way, but I just think it might be something that would be helpful for all of us who are interested in actually seeing what we're doing and kind of feeling good about it.
Love that idea, Lonnie. I put it down. I know you've mentioned it before, but thinking about really visual and fun sites, and not that food waste or farm waste to energy are interesting, but I think that it'll give you a big sense as the importance of those sorts of projects. But yeah, good stuff. I flagged it. Any other questions, comments on this? It's going to be a process. We didn't land where we were with the Smarty over a decade in year one. It took time. It took understanding, wrestling with the policy, working with the market mechanisms and our lender partners and contractors to get to where we are today, to knock on wood, which is a good program that unlocks a lot of local lender participation in supporting our energy policy, and to the extent we can have them support our other environmental infrastructure policies, all the better.
Yeah, Brian, it's Matt, and I, apologize if maybe I've missed it. I feel a little uninformed about the sort of transition here. I don't know if I know we were at one point talking about having sort of a retreat, but I guess as it affects, like, for example, this program, I agree with some of the earlier questions. I'm having a hard time figuring out what would be the limits of the way these funds in these loans could be used. I mean, it almost sounds like with a good contractor, it'd be very hard to figure out what the limits actually are. I mean, I've, having worked a little bit on the shoreline with some of the shoreline intrusion impacts on septics and raising houses, and seeing how those projects go, there are a lot of things that sort of get added on while they're doing them. And I'm not saying any of those are bad, but maybe to Lonnie's point a little bit is, do we want to know what the funds are being used for, or do we just care that they're generally being used and that there's not a big loss experience coming back, based on how they're used?
Yeah,
I would say, Matt, that there's it's a good point, but I think that this this chart really kind of goes to some of the issues that you're raising and what Joe was speaking to, meaning that it's going to be a bit of a process where we try to put discrete type of measures that are eligible for funding, so that we don't get contractors going crazy. So it's one of those things where we're going to have to really think through it so it's manageable, but that it allows us to hit our goals. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess, so is that thinking through going to happen before the limits are increased and the scope is increased? Or are you saying, we'll sort of put it out there and then start to address it? I guess that's what I'm not sure in terms of our process.
Well, we're going to have to work internally first and determine the number of external or the appropriate external stakeholders that we would talk this through with.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think right now, Matt, the recommendation is up to 75,000, and I think it's based on what Bert presented in terms of the solar with battery storage or ground source heat pumps with solar. So it's linked to a clean energy, a space that we know. I think as we start to delve into this, Joe and the crew, we're going to not only identify the measures, but we're going to identify the range of cost for those measures. And some of them are going to really stand out, which is the lifting homes, the foundation, and that's going to raise a flag for us, just from a pure perspective of, risking, the loan loss reserve to our balance sheet for one project of this size as an example, all the way to, does this really address our vulnerable community commitment? So we're going to kind of wrestle with those sorts of things. And I think, Joe, Bert, what we can do is as we go through and we find these large infrastructure requirement projects that, where we need to seek guidance from the deployment committee or others deep or other agencies we should obviously seek it.
Okay, but I guess that's my concern. So we're going to be raising the limit. We're going to be asked to recommend to the board to raise the limit, and if I heard you right, the sort of adjustments are going to happen after the limit's raised and after we start gaining experience. We're going to go back and basically learn from our experience and modify the program.
Yeah. It feels like we're going to build the plane while we're flying it, which is, not unconventional for the way we've done things the last decade. So we're just very diligent and in doing that. And none of us are experienced in water. None of us are experienced in waste. None of us are. But it's going to be that kind of a gradual process for us.
I guess I know we built in the past. We built while the plane was taking off. That I'm kind of comfortable with, but the while we're flying is the part that I'm struggling with here. It just seems like we ought to be able to gain, and maybe you guys have done this, and that's what I mean by I'm maybe missing, not been informed, but it seems like we ought to have more stakeholders. I mean, we have the ability to pull in experts in our bylaws before we release this, because I just think, I do feel like it's harder to change once it's out there.
Bert, Joe, I'm not opposed to, in this notion of approval by the Green Bank senior team, I'm not averse to coming back to deployment committee with what we discover in each of the sectors and just kind of gradually roll things out. Like, if that would help, Matt, and to the extent we need consultants to help us look at each of those sectors to better inform it, we'll do that. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Of course. Yeah.
And this is Dominic, just Brian and Bert, just to clarify in terms of what Matt's getting at. So there's sort of like what's on paper and what we would have to have on paper in order to roll this out. And then there's the sort of the rollout, the actual rollout schedule. And I don't, and maybe you've discussed this, but sort of how are you imagining, there's probably from this point forward months of looking into all these different boxes that you have here before we go public, right? How are you imagining sort of that rollout happening, or is it going to be sort of deployed over time? Or
So let me play this out a little bit, just high level. If we come back to the board in March for the broad framework, that would allow us to change the agreement with the community banks and credit unions, the framework. Then we dig into all our homework, and it may be, Joe, that we look at our deployment committee schedule and we plan out for each subsequent deployment committee meeting one sector. This is kind of what I'm doing now. Like I'm just taking 2 months in land conservation, 2 months in water, 2 months in, and it's made me much more knowledgeable by not having to wrestle with everything. So maybe we could kind of plan out those measures, and we could probably start with resilience with DEEP, since we've got our meeting coming up with them. And, at our next deployment committee meeting, present our recommendations for a set of resilience measures. That would probably be a schedule, Bert, Joe, I think that we can work with, right? It's kind of a gradual pacing ourselves rollout.
Yes.
So we
that would make me feel better. I don't mean to be slowing things down, but it just makes me nervous, especially given the levels of credit rating that's eligible and the increased amounts and both the broad categories, but also the sort of categorical risks for certain properties that are in harm's way. And, it just seems like there's a lot of moving parts. Sorry to be nervous.
No, it's good. It's a good caution. So what we'll do for the board meeting is we'll show you a rollout of how the individual segments would play out into presenting to deployment, and then we'll just gradually kind of chip away. We don't want to run before we can actually crawl here. On environmental infrastructure, there's lots of pieces. Is there anything we would have to change in the resolution? Let me take a look here. Amending Smarty include resident. Okay, so broad environmental infrastructure, and then the dollar value and raising the green bank. We could include a third resolved that the staff of the green bank would come back to the deployment committee on a regular scheduled basis for the review and approval of environmental infrastructure measures, if that works.
Well, I guess why I thought what you were describing was we wouldn't approve the increases until we had the report back on how it's going to roll out in March.
Well, these increases cover not only environmental infrastructure, but also battery energy, electrical storage. So that was the other reason for the increase in the limits, Matt.
Right. Well, can we segregate again, I'm just talking for me. I don't mean to dominate, but for my tastes, I don't really have a concern about those. We know how to do those. It's the parts of the resolution that are harder for me are in the first paragraph about including environmental infrastructure, and in the second, raising the rates. So maybe we could approve it for batteries. Again, this is my suggestion. Others can weigh in. Approve it for battery storage, et cetera, and resolve that, will come back to us with additional recommendations about infrastructure.
What about this, just at the tail end of the second resolve, as it applies to clean energy projects, so it just fits into our clean energy definition, and then adding a third resolve that the staff will come back to the deployment committee with its recommendations as it involves environmental infrastructure projects.
Yeah, that would work for me. If we're not going to be, that means then we're not going to be programmatically doing loans for environmental infrastructure until we hear back in March.
That's right.
Okay.
until we hear back, yeah, with each kind of scheduled tranche. Yeah.
And you
Works for
said
me.
because we're not clear what we're really going to be financing yet, is that because we're not clear on the scope? Because, I'm pretty comfortable with septic systems and raising houses, but is the concern that we don't know exactly what the scope of the new program is?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The definition of, for me, the definition of environmental infrastructure is really broad and includes a number of things that, Bert directed us to on the definition. And so a couple of them, I think we're all fine with. It's the things we aren't sure.
This is Lonnie. I just want to support what Matt is saying. As somebody who lives at the shore, and how FEMA's pulling back, and flood insurance and all of that. I mean, I think we really have to be clear on what's going to be dumped in our laps, like who's picking up the tab for what, and so I think that this is good for all of us to kind of stay on top of this. So I thank you, Matt. I support that.
So it feels like there's an amendment to the resolution. So let me just read it. On the second, resolved that the deployment committee approves amending the Smarty maximum loan amount from $45,000 to $75,000 and raising the Green Bank approval threshold from $40,000 to $50,000 as it applies to clean energy projects. And then a third, resolved in addition, resolved that staff will come back to the deployment committee in the future with recommendations for environmental infrastructure measures by segment. So that will allow us to kind of simplify it a bit instead of jumbling everything together. Is that okay, Matt?
That works for me. Yes. Thank you.
Great. You want to move the motion on that change to the resolution?
Yeah. If there are no other comments, so moved.
Great. Is there a second?
Lonnie, I second.
Great. Questions, comments? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, great. That's great. This gives us a really structured scheduling focus. Thank you for that. I think we are now at other business. Anything folks want to raise? Other business? If not, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Lonnie, so moved.
Excellent. Thank you, Lonnie. A second?
Second.
All right. Thanks, Matt. All right, all. Everyone have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.